Two lights there. Alright, if you guys want to get into twice.
1973. Three.
Yeah, everything was great.
I'm Alex Haugland.
And I'm Amy Haugland.
And this is our 1973 Maserati Bora. We were having too much fun driving this car to record a good cinematic intro, and we do it now, except it's raining outside.
Welcome to Oregon.
So here's your cinematic free intro. Welcome to Everyday to Exotic. There's over 200 cars in the Haugland Collection.
And it just keeps growing.
And our goal is to try and drive them all.
Each episode, we'll talk about the car's history, showcase its design and features, and dive into its mechanicals.
Then we'll take it out on a drive through the beautiful roads of Oregon.
Finally, we'll rate our car to see where it stands in the Haugland rank.
In this episode, we'll explore what happens when the French are involved in designing Italian cars.
I finally get a seat that moves up and down. Seat go up, seat go down.
And I encourage reckless driving. I have a suggestion.
Yes.
Floor it.
Okay. Woo!
All this and more on today's episode of Everyday to Exotic.
But first, let's take a look into the car's history.
Maserati was founded by brothers who were active with automobile racing from the beginning of the 20th century. Three of the brothers worked building Grand Prix cars for Diatto. In 1926, when Diatto ceased production of race cars, they founded the Maserati marque and won the Targa Florio immediately in 1926 with Alfieri Maserati behind the wheel. When Alfieri died in 1932, his remaining three brothers continued running the business until 1937, when they sold it to the Orsi family, yet remained working for it designing race cars.
The Orsi family relocated the company to Modena, Italy, continuing to build race cars designed by the three Maserati brothers, with the cars continuing to win, even against the powerful Auto Union and Mercedes cars of Germany, including winning the Indianapolis 500 and becoming the only Italian car manufacturer to do so.
Following World War II, racing continued until a tragic crash of a Ferrari in the 1957 Mille Miglia. This crash killed the driver and navigator along with 9 others, including 5 children. That led Maserati to make the decision to leave factory racing and ended the Mille Miglia as a race overall. No longer focused on racing, Maserati turned their attention to building Grand Touring cars with engines derived from the racing cars.
The Maserati 3500 GT, introduced in 1957, proved a huge success for the company. It was fitted with a 3.5-liter inline 6-cylinder engine from the 350S race car. When it came time to replace it, Maserati developed a dual overhead cam V8 engine with a displacement of 4.7 liters, putting it in a 4-door car. That engine became the basis for all Maserati V8s until the 1990s.
Though there was success in selling cars, Maserati was developing a reputation for building fast but technologically antiquated cars, as the rest of the high-end touring car market was moving forward. Thus, they ended up being taken over by the French automaker Citroën. Initially, the takeover began as a joint venture in 1968, with Citroën getting a much more modern power plant designed by Maserati to replace their very antiquated 4-cylinder engine that they had relied on for decades, while Maserati gained access to Citroën's technology for brakes and hydraulics.
The Bora was the result of Citroën's involvement in running Maserati. It used the Maserati dual overhead cam V8 in 4.7 and later 4.9 liter sizes, and was Maserati's first mid-engined rear-wheel drive car. Lamborghini and De Tomaso already had mid-engine supercars, and Ferrari was actively developing one, so Maserati had to follow suit to stay competitive. The car also was the first Maserati to feature fully independent suspension and incorporated Citroën's hydraulics for the brakes and various other hydraulically operated functions.
The body was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro at Total Design, with an incredibly efficient aerodynamic shape. This was coupled with a well-thought-out cabin with a degree of civility and comfort that was generally better than its competitors, along with a large trunk, making it an excellent touring car. With features like pop-up headlights, a stainless steel roof panel, and large glass rear compartment over a carpet-covered engine cover, the design was a significant departure from earlier Maserati cars.
Despite the innovative design, total production only reached 564 cars by the time the production ceased in 1978, having struggled to sell cars in the gas crisis of the 1970s, along with struggles after Maserati was acquired by De Tomaso in 1975. Sales likely weren't helped by the smaller engined but very similarly styled Merak, which was a more practical 2+2 seating configuration utilizing the Bora's front end.
Our Maserati Bora is a US spec model with a 4.9-liter engine. It is the first of 3 distinctly different Maseratis in the collection, and we have had to do very little to the car since acquiring it aside from maintenance. So this really is a supercar of the era. I mean, Maserati built this thing with an incredibly streamlined shape. The aerodynamics on this have a drag coefficient of 0.30, which is really, really low, even by modern standards. And you can just see that coming from the very front, the extremely sloped windshield, over the stainless roof, all the way down the back to the cam tail. It is just an absolutely clean, elegant, swooping line.
I love the aesthetics of this car. One example, this gorgeous line that follows this crease here, goes all the way back here, and then just swoops up toward the roof. That line is echoed by the line of the window here, and also the way the door is shaped. I mean, it all follows that curve.
This is really sort of that transitional point where we go from black being the new chrome. This still has chrome, but it starts getting some of that emphasis of the black lines that you start seeing on other cars, and that we saw in, like, for example, the Lamborghini Espada and things.
But with the Lamborghini Espada, because that's black, it just blended right in. So you didn't get the full effect.
Absolutely.
On this, you do. The metallic champagne gold color is nice and light, so you get really good contrast with that black trim piece. The coolness of the chrome and the stainless steel roof contrasts nicely with the warmth of that metallic champagne gold.
I mean, it really makes the chrome actually pop out more than you would think that light of a metallic color would. Silver cars, it tends to vanish, but actually just that difference between the warm champagne gold and the cool metal color really makes it stand out. It looks really elegant to me.
Speaking of the stainless steel roof, why do we have a stainless steel roof? Because it's cool.
TM. This is a mid-engine car, and so the engine sits back here. Everything up there is your trunk and your radiator. This is its own little compartment of the car. It is separate from where the driver sits and everything. There's glass between the two, so really kind of a very different design in a lot of ways from what you tend to see for other cars. This is Maserati's first move into that world, and it really was a very well executed design with the idea of this being a touring car. This is a car that was built to basically get in, enjoy, drive long distances. You don't have a screaming V8 behind your head that you can't hear anything around like you do in a De Tomaso Pantera or something along that line. This is definitely a much more comfortable car, even though it kind of is in that same market segment.
It's more about the car functioning as a car as opposed to showing off for other people to the detriment of the people actually in the car. And I appreciate that a lot about this design.
So this being a US market car, it got the US bumpers, which means you've got a big shock-mounted bumper in the back, and the front bumper is actually completely different for the European car. The original European car had a beautifully elegant bumper that sort of framed the entire thing. Offered no protection whatsoever, but looked really, really cool, and it just was a nice chrome trim around the entire opening. Instead, we've got this large stainless bumper with these big black blocks sticking off of it. One of the terms that's commonly used to refer to bumpers of this era, at least in British cars, is Sabrina bumpers. This has to do with a British actress by the name of Sabrina who had very pronounced, huge tracts of land. Hence, bumpers that really stick out get called Sabrina bumpers. I don't know what the Italian equivalent of an actress would be. I'm sure someone else does. But at the same time, it really is one of the few things that really detracts from the looks of this. It'd be so much nicer if it just had that beautiful, elegant European bumper. A lot of people convert these. This is still original to the car. I don't really see much reason to go out of my way to change it. I'll live with it as is.
Originality over aesthetics in this case.
Yeah.
So the Maserati emblem, of which this is an example, has a really cool story behind it. In Bologna, where Maserati was founded, there is a statue of Neptune. It's been there since the 16th century. And when Alfieri Maserati was creating his car company, he saw that statue and saw the trident in Neptune's hand and decided to adopt that as his emblem for his vehicles.
So carrying further back on the hood, we have this vent here. What this does is it actually lets airflow from the radiator escape. Very early versions of the Bora did not actually have that. I'm not sure how they routed air essentially that came through the front grille and through the radiator out of the car. Maybe they didn't do a very good job of it, hence the addition of the vent. But at least on this car, that's what it's for. So your trunk space sits entirely behind that radiator and that vent. So this doesn't let water into your trunk or anything like that. This vent back here, in contrast, is for fresh air into the car itself.
Also on this car, on the front, we have the ever cool pop-up headlights. And of course, when your headlights are off, then it cuts down on drag as your headlights fold down into the hood of your car.
And because Citroën, they're really kind of oddly operated, which we'll get into later. One other thing I really like about the design of this car is how the front of the hood is sort of inset, just right in that scalloped area, essentially, as it flows up. It just looks to me really elegant, kind of gives it a little bit of a raised haunch on the front. I mean, same kind of thing you tended to see on like cars of the 1950s, but in a much more square, angular, sharply defined form. But it keeps this from just being sort of a boring flat surface.
I also really love this line that goes along the bottom of the headlights and across the front of the hood and echoes this point at the very front. It's just a nice aesthetic touch. They could have just gone straight across if they'd wanted to, and they chose not to, and I appreciate that kind of detail. Another feature that makes this a really great touring car is the size of the frunk.
So pull the lever here under the dash and it pops open.
And voila.
There's a little hidden latch here you push down on and it opens up and is held up by nice sturdy shock absorbers. It's actually a really good sized trunk, especially for the car.
The frunk is wide-ish, but incredibly deep. I could put 2 carry-on size suitcases in here, no problem.
Probably about, what, 3 or 4 boxes of wine.
At least.
No question, it doesn't matter how tall the box is, it'll fit. The other thing that you'll see in the trunk is this little cover here. That goes over where the battery is actually located.
And your stuff is not gonna rattle around very much because it's padding on the bottom. The carpet also helps. Your stuff will ride in luxury.
Yeah. And the underside of this, even though there's not an engine in here, is sound insulated. So it won't drum, nice, quiet, quite a nice trunk. You can see where the ducting for the radiator basically comes up and then goes through this front grille. But otherwise, everything is sort of back in this large cavernous area.
Because this trunk is really big and really dark. And so this would allow you to see your stuff when we don't have studio lights in there.
You may have to have your headlights on for it to work. Either that or the bulb's burned out.
Note from the caretaker, I did check the bulb when the car was detailed. It is not burned out.
It does have a switch. It just doesn't do anything.
So as we said earlier, this is an American market car. And as such, legal requirements were that you had lights. These are both lights and reflectors. There's one on the front on each side and one on the back on each side.
So the wheels are alloy wheels. They're Campagnolo wheels with this giant chrome hubcap. It looks a little bit out of place to me, but it is part of sort of the iconic look of this car at the time. The other thing on the side, you'll see the fuel filler is here with the key lock to be able to get into it, and the line on the front of it and the line on the back of it basically echo the shape. Actually looks pretty good here. Something else about these cars that's sort of unusual to me is the shape of the door, which, because it does curve up in the back on the line that Amy was mentioning, it sticks out. It has a point. And you have to be a little bit careful sometimes with these cars because that point sticks out further than any other part of the door. So you open the door and you have to have a lot more space because of where that is if you have a wall next to you. So it can make it a little bit difficult getting in and out. These are the original mirrors for the car. They are electrically operated, so although they look like the typical flag mirrors you had on a lot of cars of this era, these are actually wired in and have motors built into them. Kind of early for doing that. Most of the cars by this point in time, if they had anything, was a manually adjustable mirror, but these are actually electric. Quite unusual.
I love the curve on the back of this car and the way that the window back here echoes that, as well as this vent right here. This vent and these vents in the very back allow airflow through the engine compartment so you don't overheat. These vents up here allow airflow and balance through the passenger compartment and let air out.
So, welcome to the back. So we have, as mentioned before, big American bumpers that stick out quite a ways, mounted on shock absorbers and things in order to basically have it meet US crash safety regulations, which were stupid. Unfortunately, we didn't get the European bumpers again. They do look better. This is what came on the car. So we'll live with it. I love the way the exhaust comes through. We've got our dual tip exhaust on each side, and it comes through this vent area here that basically also lets heat out of the engine bay. It just really is nice having that sort of built into the body with the body continuing underneath it, as opposed to sort of your typical car where it like sticks out underneath the car itself. It looks much more integrated.
Also protected, because sometimes you'll have a low car and you'll go over a speed bump and it'll just scrape the heck out of your exhaust. This prevents that from happening.
Yeah, there'll be something else that you scrape the heck out of it.
Oh, I'm sure. So there are logos on the back of this car, but they're pretty small and subtle. There's Bora right here, and then the Maserati over there. Unlike some cars, it doesn't depend on you seeing the logo in order to tell you what kind of car it is. It knows it's a Bora. You know it's a Bora.
Looks like nothing else, except it looks kind of like a Maserati Merak. Okay, so on to the beating heart of this car and getting into the mechanicals, which Amy doesn't care about as much. So we'll let her knit, and I'll go ahead and get the engine cover off. So, to do this, you've got two levers here. One releases a latch on one side of the car, one releases a latch on the other. Why two levers? Probably because it was a pain to get a single lever to do both accurately. So we pull both those levers. That's now unlatched, but there's still a safety catch, which is this big knob here that I have to pull and then lift up the cover. From here, we have a nice carpeted area completely covering the engine. You don't really get to see much here, frankly. It's kind of boring. Most modern supercars, you would have this like glass cover over the engine that would be showing off the entire thing. This was more about just having a nice, quiet, comfortable ride. And this carpet and everything helped keep the noise down. Not as interesting, but it means that if you really wanted to, you theoretically could store more stuff back here. I don't know why you would, but it's at least an option. So lifting off the cover is easier with two people. Thank you, Bobby.
You're welcome.
And then we have access to our engine and our giant spare tire. So to really get into this, I think it would be better if we go around to the other side. There's a little bit more to see there.
What do you think you're gonna do tomorrow?
And if you look at the engine cover itself, you'll see sort of typical Maserati, similar to what we saw in the Lamborghini Espada. There are these lightning holes pressed into the body of the car to basically help reduce weight. This is still a really heavy steel cover, so it didn't really probably save that much. That said, the Maserati Bora is actually a little bit lighter than the Maserati Ghibli, which preceded it, even though the Ghibli is in many ways a smaller looking car. So now, looking down into this opening here, we can actually start really seeing the engine. Now, something to remember about Maserati is, Maserati really, at heart, is a race car company at this point. The basis of this engine is an engine that they designed for the Maserati 450S race car. It is a 4-cam aluminum block V8, basically aluminum block, aluminum heads, hemispherical combustion chambers, fed by 4 downdraft Weber carburetors, basically in line here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 carburetors that basically feed the engine as a whole. And this basic engine design stayed as sort of the core of Maserati's design for quite a while after this. So one of the differences, at least in the early cars for the Bora, is European cars got a 4.7 liter version of this engine. US cars got a 4.9 liter. That was largely because of emissions basically strangling the engine somewhat and trying to make up some of that difference. As is, the original US spec engine in these cars at 4.9 liters made 280 horsepower and 339 pound-feet of torque. Meanwhile, the European cars made 306 horsepower and 340 pound-feet of torque out of a smaller displacement engine. Later on, they all went to the 3.9 liter, but the European engines still were a higher spec performance-wise than the US ones, again, because of emissions. Being a mid-engine car, the engine really sits in the middle between the front wheels and the rear wheels. The transmission, or transaxle I should say, mounts from the engine and goes out underneath this spare tire, essentially. It's a 5-speed manual gearbox built by ZF with the dogleg shift. So first gear is to the left and back, reverse is to the left and forward. So most of the time, once you get moving, you aren't going ever back into first gear. So you're basically second, third, fourth, fifth as an H pattern. And otherwise, you can kind of ignore the first two positions on the transmission. So one of the odd things about this car is that Citroën, who owned Maserati at this time effectively, had a hand in some of the aspects of its development. And some of the things that Maserati got out of that was they ended up getting the Citroën high-pressure LHM hydraulic system, which it uses for the brakes, the headlights, and some of the stuff in the interior. And so if you look down in this area here, you have this big can here that says LHM on it. That's part of the Citroën system. And then you've got these little green spheres mounted down in this area here that are there basically to act as accumulators for that hydraulic system. You see them on Citroën cars, you see them on Rolls-Royce cars that license the technology from Citroën as well. It's fairly complex, but it works pretty well, and it allows you to do some things with hydraulics that you wouldn't otherwise easily be able to do without an engine-driven pump to make it work. One other interesting thing, over here you have a panel with 2 switches and a push button. They are here for maintenance of the car. And if you have the key turned on, you can actually turn on and off the ignition. You can turn on and off the fuel pumps with the 2 little switches. And that push button operates the starter. So if you're working on the car and need to time it, do whatever, you actually have controls here in the engine compartment specifically to allow you to fire up the car, get it running, and if necessary, shut it off, all from the back, without having to get into the driver's seat again. Kind of an unusual thing. I haven't seen that on really anything else, but it's something that I find really unique on this car. So one other sort of odd thing that is on here, and I don't know exactly why it is designed the way it is this, which is your air filter housing. Underneath this lid, you've got the air filter and the access to the carburetors, and you've got these air intake runners that come into it. I don't know why they sort of have this shape kind of coming off the center. It may be, again, because of sort of noise reduction, trying to keep the noise and such from necessarily entering the car, so you don't really get an intake whoosh. I don't know. Other than that, it seems really kind of a strange setup. So the body of the car is a monocoque structure with a rear subframe made out of tubes of steel. So you can kind of see a lot of that rear subframe here that essentially bolts in and mounts to that unibody structure. The shocks are tubular shocks with coil springs with unequal wishbones front and rear. So it's fully independent suspension, which is also a first for Maserati. That came out with the Bora. You've got 2 little compartments in the back here as well. One here, one that side. This one doesn't really have anything in it. It's just kind of an open hole, a storage area maybe, and the release for the rear hatch actually runs through it, the emergency release. This one, however, is your radiator expansion tank and where you would fill the radiator at. So you open that to get access, close it.
Stuck inside, now I'm doing time. Thought I'd worked out the perfect crime.
And now, to close everything off again, we have to put the engine cover back in place, which can be done with one person. But it's a little bit awkward. Comes in, drops down, and then the hatch closes. It's held up by these nice shock absorbers that helps a little bit with just making sure that the weight isn't just massively coming down on you. But for the most part, it still is pretty heavy. And that's it. Okay, now I'm gonna hand it off to Amy to go over the interior.
Right. Let me put my chair away and you can join me inside.
Always find a way. You can bet on it. Every single day. You can bet on it.
So here we are in the interior. This is a luxury cruiser as well as a supercar, so you have a lot of really nice comfort features, namely the leather interior. As far as we know, this is the original interior. We haven't redone it. It's in good shape. There's a little bit of wear, but nothing bad. The seats are incredibly comfy and supportive and are basically recliners, as in they're just reclined. Also, the base is very long and curves very gradually down to the floor. So I'm very supported. Again, this car is from 1973, and it is a stylish luxury car from 1973, which means we have some very 70s-tastic styling in here. We have this really great decorative stitching here. We have the decorative stitching on the seats. As you can see, they're kind of ribbed. Make me think of caterpillar bellies for some reason. And then you have the carpet. It's not quite shag carpeting, but it is a fairly deep pile considering. Again, it's very comfortable. There's good sound deadening in here. That pane of glass in the back, that's double paned, which helps a lot, again, to protect the passengers from the noise of the engine. This car, in a lot of ways, is all about the driver. They want to make sure that you are in a comfortable driving position so that you enjoy the entire experience. This steering wheel is completely adjustable. I've got a lever here. I push up, and then I can move the steering wheel up and down so that little people like me can see over it. And then I have a dial down here that I spin, and I can move the steering wheel towards me, away from me. You have to be careful with where these levers are placed because they are right at the edge of the steering wheel. So if you have hands that are larger than mine, you may accidentally smack one of those levers as you're steering. So it's just something to be aware of and be careful of. The controls and everything really wrap around the driver. I'm in my own little cockpit here. And like many cockpits, there are many dials and many switches. And you have your usual gauges. Some highlights of the switches are the hazard light, push, it is blinky, it also clicks, that makes me happy. There's also a really cool light that lights up when your seatbelts aren't fastened. Safety, very important. These switches are cool. This one does your interior light. This one is for your defroster, and this one is for your fan, low, high, off. This one is your horn button. This is really cool. This does not sound the horn. This is so that you have your town and country settings. For one setting, I don't have to have the power turned on. The horn is in the correct place. Okay. For the other setting, that's an air horn, so you have to have power in order for that to work. I love that. Noise levels, it's great. The controls and everything wrap around the driver. The radio is over here and in the driver's control. Passenger doesn't get to do anything except have a glove compartment. The glove compartment is small. This vehicle came with air conditioning standard in 1973. And that's just this little knob right here. Does your air conditioning. This is your defrost and heat, like this and like this. This knob, we don't use this knob. This is the choke knob. This car doesn't need you to do that. So we just don't even touch that. Also over here, we have our shift knob. I like that they have the little pattern there so that reverse is forward, first is backwards. It's very important. Ashtray. The cool thing about this ashtray is that it's got this insert for the cigarette lighter inside the ashtray, which is, it's kind of cool. Another standard feature in this vehicle, power windows. Let's have to turn on the power. And very similar to its contemporary, the Alfa Romeo Montreal. Okay, so the power windows work. but they are slow. Other important and interesting high-tech switches include mirror adjustment switches. There's one for each mirror. Conveniently move it around. It makes noise. There's a little motor in there. It is not a quiet little motor. Right, so we've turned on the car because you have to have the car on in order to operate the really complicated and interesting Citroen hydraulic system. This is really cool for me as a short driver. The seat does not move forward or back. The seat goes up and down, and it's hydraulic. So I have this handy dandy switch, and I can raise myself up, put myself down. Seat go up, seat go down, seat go up, seat go down. Okay, you can have way too much fun with that. This other switch here brings the pedals toward me, so I can stay in this very comfortable seat position and operate the pedals. And then when Alex gets in the car, he can push the switch and make the pedals go away from him. It's just so exciting. I love that feature of this car. The other thing that the hydraulics operate is the headlights. So you just flip the switch, the headlights go up. However, it does not turn them on. In order to turn on the headlights, you would need to turn this knob here on this stalk. Okay. They put a lot of thought into the details of this car, and it makes such a difference in the comfort of the drive, of the ride, of the experience. So there's one more special storage compartment in this car that a lot of people don't know about, but it's really hard for me to reach from the driver's seat. So Alex is going to assist me.
Slide the door open here, and we've got this really deep, really large storage compartment with our tool roll, our jack, quart of oil, extra hydraulic fluid, a couple towels, big funnel. Oh look, an entire gallon jug of antifreeze. That's it, but frankly, you could have fit a lot more in here. It's kind of amazing, honestly. If you want to shove all of your repair and maintenance tools for this car in here, you pretty much could.
Get in your car. Kick and show them that you're not afraid now.
So here we are on the road in the Maserati. This is the first Maserati I have ever driven. It has some features that I am not accustomed to. For instance, the brake pedal doesn't move. It's a pressure plate, so that takes a little bit of getting used to. It's not a big deal. One of the things that came to my mind while I was driving this is that Citroens are weird, okay? Citroen owned Maserati when this car was built, so there's a lot of Citroen-y bits in it. But while our Citroen Deux Chevaux was weird in a low-tech way, this is weird in a high-tech way.
Yeah.
Lots of hydraulics in here. Lots of making things easy for the driver to steer straight, to go fast, to be precise in your driving.
So I think a big part of that really kind of comes down to Maserati trying to get past their image of being sort of an outdated, still high performance, but somewhat outdated car brand. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, everyone else was coming out with these really wacky, amazing, crazy things. Very different shapes, very different forms, all sorts of extra features. Maserati's like, well, we're not going to make the driver move, we're going to make the pedals move.
Well, and I really like that the pedals move because I am in a very comfortable driving position, whereas a lot of the time in other cars, if I want to reach the clutch, the steering wheel is practically in my lap.
Let's be honest, your favorite thing is the fact that the seat moves up and down.
Well,
so you
that
can
is-
actually see.
Yes, I love that. I love being able to see. and not having to look above or underneath the steering wheel. It's the stereotypical little old lady. Makes me feel like somebody's grandmother. No offense to grandmothers who drive. I'm sure many of them are taller than I am, but I love this driving position. I feel safer, quite honestly. I feel more in control. The steering on this is really nice, and I'm kind of getting used to the brakes. I'm trying not to push them too suddenly because that's not comfortable. But even on this very windy section, and even without power steering, this is pretty light and pretty easy to drive. Also, I don't have to downshift when I'm slowing down a little bit as we go down this hill, because this motor is incredibly torquey. It is fantastic. You can kind of just get into third and then just do whatever. I mean, get into fourth if you're gonna really go nuts or you're doing freeway cruising, but for the most part, it is super happy to be in third.
I mean, on the entire drive that we've done today, so far, I haven't had to get above fourth when I was driving. It's got really long legs, so it wants to go fast. It can go fast. It can go faster than you can legally take it.
Yep.
So, I mean, looking at the speedometer goes up to 200 miles an hour. It's a US market car, so it's actually in miles an hour. If you take the needle past the halfway point on the speedometer, you get pulled over and you lose your license. And then you can't drive.
And then you're sad.
I think it also says something a little bit from the fact that it's like, okay, modern supercars and things, in the back, you're going to have the engine completely exposed underneath that big piece of glass. Here, no, we're going to put a carpeted cover over the top of it. Why? Because it cuts down on noise.
Yes.
There are 2 panes of glass between us and the engine. In order to basically reduce the sound, you have an air gap between them. So you don't have that roaring V8 directly behind your head all the time. Oh God, we can hear it. It sounds
yes.
amazing. But it's also not droning us out of the car like it would if we were, for example, in a De Tomaso Pantera or something like that.
We can have a conversation
Yes.
at a normal volume.
And be tearing down the road at 60 miles an hour, and it's just very pleasant.
I like not having to scream. And also, you could take this on a long trip and not be just totally frazzled when you get out of it at the end.
Absolutely.
And everything will be alright. Just you wait and see. Breaking the speed limit. Speed limit.
I mean, if I were to say that there's a problem with this car for me right now, it's as a passenger, I actually don't have that deep of a footwell to put my feet in. The driver is far more comfortable, but
Yes.
the way that they built the car, the battery sits right past the passenger foot space here, so the passenger gets less foot room. I think that they kind of biased it towards taller men driving the car and nice, beautiful women in the passenger seat who take less space.
Yes, dainty ladies in
Dainty
the passenger
ladies.
seat. But as a dainty lady, I can still drive this comfortably and well, and that makes me super happy. This car doesn't ask a lot of me. It's happy to keep driving, but it still has a very aggressive note, and it's still kind of, I'm in charge of the road, but it doesn't want to kill me.
So you prove you're right. In the eyes of others, you're a hero overnight.
Anything else you want to cover pointedly?
That's really the main things I wanted to talk about, so
I have a suggestion.
yes.
Floor it.
Okay. Woo! Okay, kids, don't try that at home.
Kind of get a feel for the acceleration. This car has great acceleration.
Oh, it really does. It's just like, I mean, you don't have to give it a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I even actually floored it. I definitely got on it, but I do tend to be a little timid on the accelerator in a lot of these cars. Okay, that feels really good. My life does not suck.
Yeah.
Breaking the speed limit.
particularly love this car. It accelerates beautifully. Great engine sound. Really nice performance. But it also feels effortless. It feels like it floats as you go around corners. The suspension just moves exactly the way you want it to. It really is a supercar of its era. And it drives like it. The handling is really nice. The car corners beautifully. Steering is incredibly light, at least once you get moving. All the weight's in the back. The engine's in the back, or in the middle, I should say. But the front wheels don't have a lot of load on them, so they handle it really very, very well. And this engine has just so much torque. I can slow down quite a bit and still have plenty of power to get going. I don't have to necessarily downshift, even for these like 20-mile-an-hour curves or whatever these things are. And I'm not really lugging it very much. It's like, it probably would be happier not to be in fourth gear, but I'm in fourth gear at 40 miles an hour. But this car's happy in second gear at 40 miles an hour. In town, I normally don't get out of second. On these roads, I'm unlikely to get out of fourth. I can get to fifth, but frankly, if I'm not going at least 70, 75 miles an hour, there's not much reason to. In that way, it's a lot like the Lamborghini Espada. If I were to say, what are some of my favorite cars in the collection? I don't know. I love touring cars, and this is a great touring car. I personally love Maseratis. All of them that I've driven have been really nice cars, especially of this era, the early Maseratis. They have great engines. The engines are really race-bred. They're really fun to drive. They've got lots of torque, lots of performance. It's an Italian muscle car.
Yes.
It has a lot of the things that you don't get out of the V8s from Ferrari or even Lamborghini. It just has pure grunt that those cars tend not to have. It's a little bit of a different philosophy in engine design. It's not necessarily about make it small and rev high. Yeah, this engine revs fairly high, but it sure as heck isn't small. It's a big, almost 5-liter engine, which for an Italian car is huge. At the same point that this was coming out, like Ferrari was still putting like 4 liters in. You weren't really typically pushing these sizes that much. You were starting to, but they weren't really there yet.
And yet it doesn't feel like a huge car. It feels
No.
like a normal sized car.
It's really surprising how usable a package it is. I mean, you look at, it's not really what I'd call a supercar, but our Ferrari 308 GTB, contemporary car with this, mid-engine V8. They both have that in common. Ferrari, 3 liters. Still a good high-performance engine, but nothing like this. And then the Ferrari got a little trunk space. You can carry a few things here and there. This actually has a stupidly massive trunk for the type of car it is. It's great.
I mean, if we wanted to take this on a weekend away, we could.
Absolutely, without any problem at all. I could hop into it and go pretty much anywhere. And thus far in our ownership, it's been pretty reliable. I think there are downsides to things like the Citroen hydraulics. They're really pretty complex. They can leak. There's like rebuilding of spheres and things where you've got a system that is probably more complex than it really needs to be. But even with its little flaws and such, Maserati was struggling at this time, and the transition into Citroen quasi-ownership partnership, I don't think was necessarily the best long-term decision. It certainly didn't last very long, but it allowed them to make an interesting car with some of the uniqueness that makes Citroens the weird cars they are. But at the same time, it still feels more like a race-bred car than Citroens of the era, with their very floaty, admittedly rather comfortable, but not necessarily sporting suspensions.
Yes. And this, I feel like, is a really good sort of middle ground between a really hard suspension and a I can't feel the road suspension. I like the feedback that you get, but I also really like how smoothly it moves.
I mean, they took some of the best things that Citroen had to offer. Unfortunately, they also took some of the not as great things, like some of the Ducellier switches and things that are sort of iffy and impossible to replace because French people don't like remaking parts, evidently. So it's sort of a mix of gains and losses, and that seems to happen a lot in cars. I mean, Lancia, when they got acquired by Fiat, well, they gained having ownership with some money, but at the same time, they sort of lost the core of what made Lancia Lancia. a lot of the really creative engineering and like the high quality features and things like that kind of started to fade away. And I think that Maserati was kind of the same thing in some ways, except that Maserati had a point where it's like they didn't have the money to innovate. They didn't have necessarily the ability to. They had some amazing technology from racing and some amazing ideas on how to build cars. And I think they had the right end of the stick as to what kind of car to build. Build cars you can use every day. Build cars that are actually really practical, usable cars that drive beautifully, high performance and things like that. But at the same time, people weren't buying them because they were kind of pricey for what they were.
And it's very hard to balance that as a car manufacturer. I think people are less likely to invest in an untried idea
Yes.
or in innovation, like in something that they buy for themselves, and more likely to invest in proven things, which means that innovation becomes unprofitable, which means they never get any money to do it, which means it doesn't happen.
Yeah. We've got a bunch of great touring cars in the collection. It's really hard to kind of pick what is the best out of all of them, even in that one category.
It's true.
But our Maseratis are really up there.
Yes.
It really is surprisingly practical, especially for a mid-engined supercar. Very, very few things like it.
That was a really lovely drive.
Yeah,
I'm glad we did that today.
it is 6 o'clock.
Well, we'll have to think about dinner.
Yep.
2 hours later.
Okay, we're back after an exhilarating drive in the Maserati Bora, and we're back in the studio and ready for the Haugland Score. Here's how it works.
Alex and I have individually rated the car in 5 categories, each with a rank of 0 to 10. Then we add our scores together to give us the final Haugland score.
After we combine our scores, the results go up on the board.
The first category is performance, and I gave it an 8. I absolutely love this car. It accelerates extremely well. It brakes well once you get used to the weird kind of pressure plate pedal, but it was so fun to drive, and it's another one of those cars that just does whatever you want.
I also gave it an 8 for pretty much the same reasons. The acceleration is great, the braking is very good, but it is odd, admittedly. The pedal doesn't move, it's just a switch that you basically press on. And the more pressure you put, the more it brakes the car, or more it causes
It
the car to
slows the
stop.
car down.
It's a good idea not to brake the car.
Don't break the car.
For style, I also gave it an 8. I love the styling of this car. It really is a beautifully designed car. There's a couple things that I find a little bit odd. The carpeted engine cover is a little bit strange. You have this big hatch that you open in the back onto what is basically a piece of carpet. I'm not overly fond of the wheels, which are kind of a Citroen-y thing. They just don't quite fit. I would have preferred something a little bit closer to like the Chromadoras or something that, like the wheels that are on the Lamborghini Espada, something that was more like screamingly Italian. And unfortunately, we've got the American bumpers, and that just, it throws me.
Yeah.
The Italian style is a better design on this car.
I gave it an 8 for similar reasons. I love the lines of this car. I think it is gorgeous. Any light, any angle, doesn't matter how you're looking at it, it is stunning. You'll notice it from far away because it's different from anything else out there. So for drivability, I gave it a 7. It's fun to drive. It's not difficult to drive, especially with the hydraulic pedals and all the, cool stuff. I really liked my driving position, but I would be scared of parking that, like at the grocery store or something. I would be terrified of somebody bumping it.
I gave it an 8. I do love the way it drives. I love the fact that it has a real trunk. I can actually put things I could use. The biggest issue really is, do I want to park it anywhere? Mm-hmm. And the other problem is parts availability is really somewhat tricky on these cars.
Good point.
The next is significance, and I gave it a 7. I mean, it is a significant car in the sense that it is Maserati's first independently suspended car. It is their first mid-engine car. At the same time, they built 500 some odd of the things. They did not make that much, didn't really have that major a mark in some ways on the future of the company. It was outsold by the Merak, which was the V6 2+2 version of sort of the same car. And most people looking at this actually think it's a Merak, which is kind of sad. And I don't think Maserati really had a good replacement for it either. It's not one of those things where this became the iconic car that defined Maserati forever. I mean, the Quattroporte is the car that sort of defined Maserati forever, much more than this did.
I also gave it a 7 because while this was technologically a leap forward for Maserati, it was not a leap forward in the general car world. Other sports cars had been doing the mid-engine thing for a while. They did some cool things again with the hydraulics and stuff like that, but people don't remember this car very much, unfortunately. So for Delight, I gave it an 8. It is so much fun. It is sheer joy to drive. And other people do look at it and go, wow, what's that? That's really cool. So I feel like it delights both me and others.
I actually gave it a 7. It's a fantastically fun car to drive. It's a car that a lot of people haven't seen. It's a car with beautiful lines, so there's a lot of positives there. It just doesn't inspire quite the same joy in me as the Lamborghini Espada, and I think I gave the Espada an 8. And so it's hard for me to really say that this deserves the same ranking. I guess that's really it.
This doesn't thrill you to your soul the way that the Espada did.
Yeah.
All right, we've done some calculations, and that comes out to 76 points for our 1974 Maserati Bora. That ties it with our 1972 Datsun 240Z.
Okay, so here we go again. We cannot have two cars with the same score. One of them has to move up, one of them has to move down. So,
Car clash?
car clash. To make this happen, I'm going to list a couple positives for each car and a couple negatives. You do the same, and then we determine which one beats the other one out.
We'll give the winner a small bonus, just to give it its own spot in the ranking.
So, there's a lot that these two cars surprisingly have in common. The styling on this car to me really stands out, so I'd actually give that to the Bora.
See, I like the Datsun better.
Okay, so we're tied there.
This one has better acceleration
Yes,
and is more powerful.
and a better sounding engine.
It does have a better sounding engine. I will give it that, absolutely. However, the Datsun is the one I'm more likely to just hop into and go.
I would agree with you on that. It's one of those things where the Datsun is a car you truly could drive every day. This is a car you could drive every day, but you'd worry about.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel that this is a very natural car to get behind the wheel of. It's well balanced, it steers really well, the power is great, it's on demand, it's very long-legged, so you're never stressed at all.
But I feel like the Datsun keeps you more involved, partially for that reason, because you are shifting a lot more often. However, if I was going on a long drive, I would rather take the Bora, because the Datsun is so fun, but nowhere near as comfortable and as easy to drive as this.
The Bora carries more wine without anyone being able to see it. It has a
It is a
better
point.
trunk because it's actually a trunk. You could possibly cram more into the Datsun, but at the same point, technically you can cram stuff on top of the engine cover underneath that glass. Not that I typically would, but
No,
you could.
I'd be worried about
What else do you
heat.
do with it? I mean, it's sort of dead space otherwise. The Datsun is a very comfortable car to drive. This one has air conditioning.
Oh, that is a good point. The Datsun does not have air conditioning.
On this, it was standard. On the Datsun, it was an option. I mean, as weird as it is, the seat adjustment on this is actually really good for you.
It's awesome. It's better than the Datsun.
I find the passenger seat on this a bit weird because the battery sits right in front of the footwell. The passenger seat has less legroom than the driver's seat. So I'd say the Datsun is probably the more significant car. It had a bigger impact on the industry as a whole because it really kicked off Japanese cars as sports cars. The Datsun really was the one that really cemented in people's minds that the Japanese could build a good sports car.
As we pointed out in that episode, they kind of killed the British and Italian sports car market in the United States, at
Partly
least for a
because
while.
that car was so good.
And inexpensive.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing.
This is not a cheap car.
No.
So, boy, this is still hard. I almost want to give it to the Bora, but I think it should go to the Datsun.
And see, that's difficult for me because I feel like objectively the Bora is a better car.
Yes.
But I love the Datsun on a more everyday level. And I also feel like what you pointed out about the significance kind of sets it apart.
Okay, I'm going to propose something really weird this time.
Should we flip a coin?
I think we should flip a coin.
Let's flip a coin.
Okay.
Okay.
Engines in the front on the Datsun, engines in the back on the Bora.
Yes.
So, okay.
Moment of truth.
It is heads. The Datsun gets it. So therefore, the Datsun gets an extra half point, going to a score of 76.5, and thus stays in 5th place. Our Maserati stays at 76, which bumps it down to 6th.
Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed this. We had a good time. That's the first time I think that we've not had a definite one car is better than the other one. That was very cool.
They're both fantastic. Hopefully we're not using this too much more.
I hope not. But wow, it tells you about how good cars can be, but in really different ways.
Absolutely. So, that said, this is another opportunity for you to really disagree with us. Feel free. I mean, if you're like, oh no, Datsuns are the best things ever, or how dare you rank a lowly Datsun against a Maserati Bora and give the Datsun the edge?
What is up with you? Blame Lady Luck.
One thing to note, we don't care what the price of the car is. We don't care what the value of the car is. We care what the car is. And so our rankings here are not based on what is most expensive, what is worth the most money, what is the rarest. It is what is the best. And the best isn't driven by those things.
Thanks a lot for watching. I had something else I wanted to say. Never mind.
Okay, well, with that, bye.
Bye.
Oops. Okay. I would cut actually with the coin in the air.
Yeah, and it like freezes.
Yeah.
And then we have to